Hey, Shalom, Israel. Yahweh Bashim, Yahweh Shai Barakatham to the brothers. Yahweh Shamalatham Bashim, Yahweh Shai to the sisters. This ISUPK started out at 1 West 125th Street, Harlem, New York, under Commanding General Yohana. This ISUPK, Kentucky, Precinct Officer Hawamar. And this is our Sunday night, what you didn't learn in history class. This is episode 9. What we get into tonight is going to be a episode on people you assumed were white. And we're going to go into a little bit of unknown history about the Revolutionary War era. Revolutionary War being the era in American history where the colonists went to war against the British Empire, right? So we're going to talk about some key figures in that part of American history. And again, people that you assumed were white. Now, if I may, we're going to go into just like as usual on what you didn't learn in history class. We're going to go through a lot of receipts, a lot of evidences, and we're going to cover, like I said, certain key figures. So this is the first. This is the first source. It's called the Loyal Nine. Now, the Loyal Nine, they were a group of people. They were the ones responsible for dumping the tea in the water. So we're going to go through a couple of sources here. It says the Loyal Nine, Boston, Massachusetts, became the epicenter of the colonists' opposition to British rule, 1765. A group of Bostonians formed a social club. Now, when it's talking about a social club, it's talking about the origins of secret societies in America. It says attempting to avoid the scrutiny a political organization might provoke. Their purpose, however, was more than social. This group of 9 Bostonians formed and operating in secrecy plotted a response to the Stamp Act. Now, if I may, Google Stamp Act, it'll give you a little bit of a backstory here. All right, it says they called themselves the Loyal Nine. Although they were respectable merchants and tradesmen, they were not necessarily the most prominent Bostonians. They were private and unassuming, avoided undue publicity, and were diligent in their secretiveness. Again, we're dealing with secret societies here. The names of the Loyal Nine aren't prominent in American history books, but these 9 men sowed the seeds of the American Revolution. They were average, hardworking, fighting against tyrannical rule. All right, it says very little is known about the Loyal Nine as they operated in complete secrecy since they were a close-knit group made up of 9 men. The organization functioned informally and left very little in terms of a paper trail. The membership of the Loyal Nine consisted of Club Secretary John Avery, Henry Bass, Thomas Chase, Stephen Cleverly, Thomas Crafts, Benjamin Eads, Joseph Field, John Smith, and George Trott. All 9 men were going to become active members in the Sons of Liberty, and 4 of the 9 men are documented to have participated in the Boston Tea Party. Now, the Boston Tea Party, of course, is the incident where these people dumped the tea in the harbor. All right, it says for 10 years following the formation of the Loyal Nine, tensions between the British government and colonists grew. As pressures built in America, chapters of the Sons of Liberty were formed all over the 13 colonies, especially throughout New England, Virginia, and the Carolinas. Now, bear with me, and we're going to get into the meat of what we're talking about, but I just got to give y'all a backstory first, so bear with me. It says, as the independence movement grew, so did the colonists desire to adopt some form of heraldry. Heraldry was used throughout history as a means to express a group's pride and loyalty. In 1767, the Loyal Nine adopted a 5 red and 4 white vertical stripe flag as the group's formal standard. It became known as the rebellious flag, and the 9 stripes paid tribute to the Loyal Nine. With the rebellious flag and the groundswell of support for independence came the Sons of Liberty. And again, we're talking about the people that kicked off the Revolutionary War against the British Empire. All right. It says the Loyal Nine, a well-organized patriot political organization shrouded in secrecy. Again, we're talking about secret societies, was formed in 1765 by 9 like-minded citizens of Boston to protest the passing of the Stamp Act. Again, if I may, Google Stamp Act to kind of give you the backstory. It says the Loyal Nine were evolved into a larger group, the Sons of Liberty, who were arguably influential in that organization. Very little is known about the Loyal Nine as they operated in complete secrecy. Since they were a close-knit group made up of 9 men, the organization functioned informally and left very little in the forms of a paper trail. Membership of the Loyal Nine consisted of the club secretary, John Avery, and it's going to talk about the individuals that we read in the last slide. All right, it says all 9 men will go on to become active members in the Sons of Liberty, and to date, 4 of the 9 men were documented to have participated in the Boston Tea Party. All right, Loyal Nine were the forerunners of the Sons of Liberty. It says one of these groupings would be a secret Boston association known as the Loyal Nine, composed of elite gentlemen. Again, it goes over the members of the Loyal Nine, and it continues. As time progressed and frustration with the crown began to heat up in the colonies, the Loyal Nine merged into the more famous organization known as the Sons of Liberty. Members of this group were Samuel Adams, Joseph Warren, Paul Revere, who we're going to get into, Benedict Arnold, who we're going to get into, Benjamin Eads, John Hancock, Patrick Henry, John Lamb, William McKay, Alexander McDougall, James Otis, Benjamin Rush, Isaac Sears, Hayman Solomon, James Swan, Charles Thompson, Thomas Young, Marinus Willett, and Oliver Wolcott. All right, so we got an image of Paul Revere right here. Now, again, we're talking about people that you assumed were white. This is the subtitle of episode 9. We've got a real image of Paul Revere. Now, Paul Revere was the individual. He was the one famous for talking about the British are coming. The famous saying, "The British are coming." This is him. And as you can see, he's not a so-called oppressor. All right, so this is from Paul Revere Heritage Project. Family. To best understand Paul Revere's character, it will be useful to start with the insight of his family. Revere's father, whose original name was Apollo Revere, was a French Huguenot. Now, the Huguenots, if I may, we're going to get into them later, but the Huguenots were a group of Moorish people. And when I say Moorish people, I mean black people that went into secrecy once the Moors were being kicked out of Europe. All right, it says the Huguenots were French Protestant whose religion was persecuted in predominantly Roman Catholic France. One of the most famous episodes in history was the Bartholomew Day Massacre of 1572, when thousands of Huguenots were slaughtered in Paris. This event started the centuries of the Huguenot flight in the Protestant European countries, such as England and later the American colonies. Now, a lot of the French explorers in the American colonies were of Huguenot descent, meaning they were Moorish people or black people. It says during the time, more than 400,000 of them left the country. Now, we're going to talk about later when these Huguenots, these Moors, these black people left Europe, where they went. It says among those who left were Apollo Revere, Isaac and Serene. Apollo himself was born in France in 1702. The immigrant port on the island in the English Channel to live with his uncle, who later sponsored his trip to Boston in 1723 to earn goldsmith or perhaps a silversmith trade. The uncle not only paid for the ticket, but also the down payment for the goldsmith master to take the boy as an apprentice. So we're talking about the family of Paul Revere, who were a group of Huguenots, which were undercover Moors, aka black people. All right, it says Gaelic blood flowed through Paul Revere's veins. This is from American Heritage. 1685, France's King Louis XIV, I've got an image of King Louis, rekindled the expiring fires of religious warfare by his revocation of the Edict of Nantes and French legal assaults on his Protestant subjects who went by the name Huguenot. In the ensuing years, thousands of them were harried out of their homeland and fled into England, Switzerland, the Netherlands, and the British provinces in North America. So it's talking about where these people immigrated to. The last of the group was a 13-year-old boy named Apollo Revere, which is Paul Revere's father, who was deposited in a wharf in Boston one wintry day in 1715. All right, it says Apollo carried with him the Huguenot virtues so carelessly undervalued by King Louis: diligence, economic ambition, prudence, and a hunger for skill and independence. He was apprenticed by John Cooney, one of Boston's 32 gold and silversmiths. And it's just going to go on and give a history of the Revere family in America. All right, it says December 1734, nature bestowed upon him, who had been Apollo, a son to carry his new American name. The infant boy was baptized Paul, January 1st, 1735, by the new calendar then coming into use. And the calendar it's talking about is 1735 is the Gregorian calendar. And again, we've got an image of Paul Revere right here. All right, I told you I've got an image of Louis XIV. Now, Louis XIV, this is who the Louisiana Purchase was named after right here, Louis XIV. We've got some sources, one by Richard Wilkinson, Louis XIV. It says Louis XIV's swarthy complexion and prominent nose were typically bourbon. All right, the next source, James Peter Malcolm, Ancient History and Modern Description of London, compiled from patriarchal records. It says Louis XIV had arched eyebrows, aquiline nose, and a brown complexion. Here's an image of Louis XIV. And again, this is the cat who the Louisiana Purchase is named after. So again, what you didn't learn in history class, episode 9, people you assume were white. Here's Louis XIV right here. All right, so the next person we're going to get into is Benedict Arnold. The source is Washington and His Generals, Legends of the Revolution by George Lippard, autobiographical sketch of the author, Reverend Chauncey Burr. All right, Philadelphia, 1847. This is the source. All right, this is page 196 in the section of Benedict Arnold. It says, "The aged persons, survivors of the revolution, have told me singular and impressive stories about Arnold's appearance and demeanor while in Philadelphia after his trial." Now, we're going to talk about what was so special about Benedict Arnold's appearance. All right, he wandered from place to place with an even and steady gait, neither looking to one side or the other, scarcely even speaking to anyone, either in courtesy or in anger, but preserving a settled and calm look and manner. And when the mob stoned him, he never looked back, but patiently received their missiles in his face, and on his wounded limb, he had grown patient. Now, Benedict Arnold was known as the traitor. It says, they tell me that his features were swarthy, battle-worn, lost every trace of vivacity, and were rigidly fixed. The lips compressed, his brow calm and unfrowning, wore an expression that no one could read, while his eyes had a wildness in their gleam and a fire in their glance that told someone of supernatural struggles at work within him, the battle between Arnold's revenge and Arnold's pride. So it's talking about, it says his features were swarthy and battle-worn. Now, swarthy is another word that means black. We're going to get it. We're going to get it here in a minute. It says, "Who shall tell the horrors that mental combat? At this time, he brings to mind the Hebrew giant Samson." So this author is comparing Benedict Arnold to a Hebrew. It says, "Yes, Arnold imagined his pursuers had put out the eyes of his honor and shorn off the locks of his strength. He fancied himself brought forth before all America to make sport of the tricksters and trimmers in camp and in Congress, the cowardly Philistines of that heroic time." So again, it's comparing Benedict Arnold to a Hebrew, and it said he had a swarthy complexion. All right, another source. This is The Regulars Are Coming. Rick Atkinson's Revolutionary War trilogy looks fair to become the standard account that war brought the American Republic into being, by Andrew Roberts. It says, similarly, Atkinson depicts Benedict Arnold as muscular and graceful, black hair, A swarthy complexion, is that word swarthy again. Swarthy complexion and a bleaky nose. He was adept at fencing, boxing, sailing, shooting, riding, and ice skating. It was as fine a captain as America would produce that century, a man born to lead other men into the dark of the night, yet he would forever be an enigma, beset with both gnawing sense of grievance and the nattering enmity of lesser fellows. Again, it says Benedict Arnold had a swarthy complexion. All right, so let's get into this word swarthy. All right, now swarthy comes from the word Schwarz, which is a German word that means black person. Right, so swarthy comes from Schwarz. It says perhaps originally a code word to refer to black servants when they were in an earshot, as its German cognate Schwarz is said to have been used. All right, swarthy, adjective, dark colored, especially of skin, 1580s, unexplained alteration of swarthy, 1570s. So when it's talking about swarthy, it's talking about a black person. Here's the proof right here. And here is a image of Benedict Arnold. Again, what you didn't learn in history class, episode 9, people you assume were white. So we got Benedict Arnold. All right, we got Crispus Attucks. Now, Crispus Attucks, if you know the history on him, he was the first person to die in the American Revolution. Right, March 5th, 1770. Now, what they don't tell you is that Crispus Attucks was a native Indian. All right, Crispus Attucks was not a Judite, but Crispus Attucks was actually a Gadite, native Indian, biblical tribe of Gad. All right, so now every episode I try to use the dictionary and bring up words and definitions of words that we use. Now, I know anybody watching might say, well, you're always using the white man's dictionary. You're always using the white man's dictionary. Well, I got something for that. All right, Daniel Webster. Now, Daniel Webster was the first cousin of Noah Webster. Noah Webster being responsible for Webster's dictionary. All right, so after this, I don't want to hear nothing about using the so-called white man's dictionary again. All right, Daniel Webster, first cousin of Noah Webster, U.S. Congressman, first cousin of Noah Webster. The source is Sex and Race, Volume 2 by J.A. Rogers. All right, it says Daniel Webster was so dark that if seen among Negroes, he would easily be mistaken for one. It says he was known as Black Dan, so swarthy that in his complexion that the Deweys mistook him for an Indian. General John Stark, referring to Daniel's Moorish complexion, again, Moorish is another word for black. It says Daniel's Moorish complexion, said it was like that of Ebenezer Webster, which burnt gunpowder could not change. Webster himself said that one of his ancestors had very swarthy skin and black coarse hair. So when it's talking about a swarthy complexion and black coarse hair, it's talking about black people. All right, it says, as regards the statement that if Daniel Webster had been seen in a colored audience, he would have been mistaken for a colored. We have the following from General Butler, who wrote to Secretary of War Stanton from Louisiana regarding the regiment of Negroes he was enlisting for service in his Union Army. I shall have within a few days a regiment of native guards, colored, the darkest of whom will be about the complexion of the late Mr. Webster. So again, it's talking about Daniel Webster, the first cousin of Noah Webster. Noah Webster being responsible for Webster's dictionary. It says he had a swarthy complexion, swarthy skin, black coarse hair, and when it's talking about the colored guards, it says the darkest of whom would be about the complexion of the late Mr. Webster. It's talking about black people. It's talking about a black man. So the Noah Webster from Webster's dictionary was a black man. All right. All right, the Tammany Society, an offshoot of the Sons of Liberty. We're talking about another secret society that was an offshoot of the Sons of Liberty. All right, Columbian Order Records, 1791 to 1898. All right, it says that the Tammany Society or Columbian Order was a fraternal, patriotic, and benevolent society founded in New York City, 1786. It was officially organized under the Constitution in 1789. From its inception, the society associated itself with the democratic principles and the Republican form of government established in the American Revolution. So we're talking about another secret society, and we're going to get into who started this secret society. All right, the society played an instrumental role in the development of Democratic Party in New York during the late 19th century. At the same time, its meeting place, Tammany Hall, became synonymous with democratic machine politics in the city. The society's members influenced local, state, and national party politics in the mid-20th century. St. Tammany societies began their existence in the 18th century as the social clubs in the American colonies, notably in Pennsylvania, and flourished during the Revolutionary era associated with the American cause. Tammany was a Delaware Indian chief and contemporary with William Penn, who later acquired the role of patron saint in American popular culture. In 1789, the Constitution, the St. Tammany Society in New York City identified itself as St. Tammany Society or the Columbian Order, thus acknowledging two patrons, Tammany and Christopher Columbus. The name was shortly changed thereafter to Tammany Society or Columbian Order. The society was incorporated in New York State in 1805 as a charitable organization under the name the Society of Tammany or Columbian Order. The names Tammany Society or Columbian Order and the Society of Tammany or Columbian Order were both in common use. The society established itself as the head of national order, issuing dispensations for the creation of other societies with the same name in New York City. So again, we're talking about another secret society that came out of the Sons of Liberty, the people responsible for starting the Revolutionary War. Now, Salaki, if this is hard to see, but I'll go ahead and read it out for you. All right, it says the choice of patrons emphasized the American identity of the society, which initially required a native birth for its officers in contract to fraternal societies associated with European heritage. Now, when it says European heritage, don't automatically assume that these were so-called white people. Don't automatically assume when it says European that these people were so-called oppressors, so-called white people, the biblical Edomites. It says such as St. Andrew Society, St. George's Society, and the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick. Like the other Tammany societies modeled its organizational structure and the culture of the amalgam of Native American and national traditions. Its meeting place was the wigwam, and its membership was divided into 13 tribes representing the original 13 states. The Grand Sachem was elected annually at its head. William Mooney, the first Grand Sachem, and John Pentard, we're going to get into John Pentard, because John Pentard was the one that started this particular secret society that again grew out of the Sons of Liberty, who are responsible for the Boston Tea Party. It says a wealthy merchant and his first or master of ceremonies figured predominantly in the society's foundational years. Early meetings were held in the rented spaces in local taverns until the society acquired property and built Tammany Hall. All right. Slovakia. All right, so it's talking about, again, another secret society, and it's dealing with Tammany Hall. All right, so this is the emblem of that secret society. Notice the fez right here. And it's the same headpiece worn by George I. All right, same headpiece worn by George I right here. All right, you see it's got the same fez on. All right, so this is George I of England. And as you can see, it's the same It's the same emblem for the logo for Tammany Hall. Again, another secret society. All right, John Pincer Jr. started the Tammany Society. He was a descendant of Antoine Pincer, a Huguenot from La Rochelle, France. Again, this word Huguenot is another word that means black person. All right, it says he was orphaned when his mother died when he was a fortnight old. His father died when he was about 18 months. His father, John, was a seagoing merchant, and his mother was Mary Cannon. He was raised by his uncle, Louis Pincer, and attended grammar school under the Reverend Leonard Cunting at Hempstead, New York. Now, we're going to go into this word, Huguenot, and we're going to prove that these Huguenots of France were black people. So the source we're going to use is The History of the Conquest of Spain by Arab Moors, with the sketch of the civilization which they achieved and imparted to Europe by Henry Coppée, 2 volumes, volume 2, second edition in Boston. All right. It says, of his first great duty, loyal to his sovereigns, he was the Christ bearer and the dove, and the carrier dove of Christianity to the utmost parts of the earth. But from Christian Spain, he brought, without intending it, only evil to the Aborigines. It was the Inquisition of fierce propaganda. It was grinding labor. It was cruelty, which could only end in extermination of the natives. What he dispensed of Moorish civilization was only good. Again, when it's talking about Moorish, it's talking about black people. It says the inventions and discoveries they had introduced. His vessel was fitted out that little port of Palos, which had lately been a Moorish port. His sailors were many of them men with Moorish blood in their veins. It had been asserted that when the Moors were driven out, thousands took refuge in south of France. It says when the Moors were driven out, thousands took refuge in south of France, who afterwards, abhorring the Roman Catholic persecutions, became Huguenots. So again, this is proof that these Huguenots were Moors, or AKA black people. And these are the ancestors of people like Paul Revere, people like Benedict Arnold, and other early French explorers in the Americas. All right, it says Roman Catholic persecutions became Huguenots, and that many of these immigrated at a later day to South Carolina. Be that as it may, the Spaniards had found for the world a virgin land to introduce Spanish errors, and especially Spanish bigotry, and great tide rushed in from the Protestant Europe to occupy it. So it's talking about proof that these Huguenots were Moorish people. Now we're going to talk about the definition of the word Moor. All right, if you scroll down here, it says from Greek moros, perhaps a native name, or else cognate with moros, black. Also applied to Arabic conquerors of Spain, being dark people in relation to Europeans. Their name in the Middle Ages was synonymous for Negro, 16th and 17th century, which is the time period that we're talking about. So this is proof that the word Moor just means black. All right, so we're talking about the Revolutionary War. And of course, the Revolutionary War was the war with the American colonists and the British Empire. So this is King George III. All right, King George III. This is him on the money. This is called the Barbados penny. So we got an image of King George on the money, an image of King George on a painting, and a source, John Brown, Memoirs of George III, late King of Britain, 1820. It says George III was in height about 5 feet 10 inches, a robust person. In his youth, he was considered handsome, but his face and eyes were too prominent. His thick lips, his mouth large and wide, and his face was of a deep copper color. So when we're talking about a deep copper color, we can only be talking about one particular group of people. All right, King George III. The source is Memoirs of George III, the late King of Britain, 1820. It says his lips thick, his mouth large and wide, his face was a deep copper color. So this is who the American colonists were fighting against in the Revolutionary War. This is King George III of Britain. All right, so we're going to talk about how a lot of these black Europeans, how a lot of these black Europeans got to the Americas. All right, a lot of these black Europeans came to the Americas when the Moors were being pushed out of Europe. All right, so the first source is David McRitchie, Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1. All right, David McRitchie, Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1. It says, although the black heathen were expelled from these islands centuries ago, and although a distinct race, they have almost vanished from Europe. This is why during the Middle Ages, up until just a few hundred years ago, black people were all over Europe, and they're not today. So this is the reason, right? This is the source. It says, and although the black heathen were expelled from these islands centuries ago, and although it's a distinct race, they have almost vanished from Europe. This is why you don't see black people in Europe the way you used to. All right, source David McRitchie, Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1, 1884. All right, so where did they go? All right, it says the Transportation Act of 1717 was an act of the Parliament of Great Britain that established a regulated bonded system to transport criminals to the colonies in North America for indentured service and as punishment for those convicted or attainted in Great Britain. It says over 6 decades of the 1717 Act used to its American colonies transportation of convicts, and others helped supply the much needed colonial labor, which in turn increased its production and benefited the realm as a whole. So we're going to get into who some of these convicts were that were shipped from Great Britain to North America. All right, it says the established system for transporting convicts to the British American colonies continued until 1776, when its use was temporarily suspended by the Criminal Law Act of 1776. All right, so now we're going to get into some more sources. It says the complexion of the islanders of the Isles of Arran. Now it's going to talk about pretty much all the British Isles, Great Britain, Scotland, etc. All right. It says the inhabitants of this isle are well proportioned, generally brown, and some of black complexion. They enjoy a good state of health and have a genius for calling or employments, page 224. All right. The complexion of the islanders of the Isle of Jura. The natives here are very well proportioned, being generally black in complexion and free from bodily imperfections. They speak the Irish language. So it's talking about Black Irish, page 239. All right. The complexion of the islanders of the Isle of Colonsay. The inhabitants are generally well proportioned and of a black complexion. They speak only the Irish tongue, page 248. And the source is a description of the Western Islands of Scotland, 1716. All right, so that is a description of people from the British Isles. All right, the next source is the Jacobite Gleanings. Jacobite Gleanings from State Manuscript, short sketches of the Jacobites, the transportation in 1745 by J. Macbeth Forbes. Now, when it's talking about the Jacobites, it's talking about the history of the Jacobite Rebellion and how these Jacobites were rounded up and sent to the Americas in 1745. All right, so this is the source, and it's going to go over. It's actually got a ship log and a description of these so-called prisoners, these so-called convicts that were sent to the Americas. And these people were considered criminals because they started the Jacobite Rebellion. So if I may do the history on the Jacobite Rebellion. So we've got a ship log in the book, and it's going to go over all of the prisoners that were on the ship. So this is to give you a couple of them. Eliza Claverling, brown and thin. Mary Kennedy, brown, full-faced and ruddy. James Dunbar, dark complexion, well-made. Joseph Brown, dark complexion, well-made. Andrew Mill, brown complexion, slender and thin. Charles Grant, brown complexion, robust and well-made. All right. McDougal Campbell, brown complexion. Alex Cadenac, black and ruddy. Alex Campbell, brown. John Campbell, brown and swarthy. John Gordon, black and well-made. John Grant, black and well-made. David Joyner, brown. So it's given the description of all of the prisoners that were on this ship being sent from the British Isles to the Americas. All right. William McLean, black, well-set, strong and ruddy. Peter McIntosh, brown, very strong made. All right. George Nickel, brown, strong, well-made. John Stewart. And when we're talking about John Stewart, we're talking about the family of King James. All right, John Stewart, brown, well-made, and swarthy. Again, that word swarthy means black. Isabel Chambers, black, tall, and slender. So it's talking about these prisoners that were being sent from the British Isles to the Americas in 1745. And this is how you have an influx of black people from Europe, just before the Revolutionary War era. All right. So this is the history of black Europeans in the Americas. We're talking about the descendants of people like Paul Revere, descendants of people like Benedict Arnold, Noah Webster, etc. Now, what I want to end the class with, I just proved who a lot of these black people in the Americas were. Now we're going to talk about who they were not. All right. So this is, I put this post up yesterday. It says participants and leaders in the Harlem History Club included Willis Nathaniel Huggins, who also owned Blyden Bookstore in Harlem, John Henry Clark, John G. Jackson, Joel A. Rogers, Charles Sifford, Richard B. Moore, William Leo Hansberry, and Kwame Nkrumah. Now we're talking about your biggest Pan-African Grandmaster teachers right here. Biggest Pan-African Grandmaster teachers. It says Nathaniel Huggins, John Henry Clark, John G. Jackson, Joel A. Rogers, William Leo Hansberry, and Kwame Nkrumah. All right, it says the West 135th Street Branch YMCA at 181 West 135th Street was built 1919 at the cost of $375,000 with the funding of Julius Rosenwald. Now, Julius Rosenwald was a so-called white Jewish man, president of Sears and Roebuck and Company. The 226-room building was designed by architect John Jackson in the style of the Italian Palazzo. West 135th Street Branch established itself as a major institution in the community and in the Harlem Renaissance, serving everyone from writers to Pullman. So we're talking about the funding. We're talking about the funding of your major Pan-African Grandmaster teachers. The funding of your so-called Pan-African Grandmaster teachers comes from a Jewish man. The funding comes from a Jewish man named Julius Rosenwald. This is this devil right here, Julius Rosenwald. And look how he's got these children here. Look how he's got these black children right here. All right, with his name spelled out on t-shirts. So all of this fake ass Afrocentrism, all of this back to Africa nonsense, all of your so-called Pan-African Grandmaster teachers like Kwame Nkrumah, John Henry Clark were all funded by a white Jewish man named Julius Rosenwald. So with that, we'll go ahead and end it. All right, tune in to the next episode of What You Didn't Learn in History Class. It'll be episode 10. With that, Shalom, Yahweh Bashem, Yahweh Shabbat Rakatham to the brothers. Shalom Yahweh Shemar Latham by Hashem Yahweh Shai to the sisters. With that, class dismissed.